welcome back for another project here on the workbench. Today we're going to be adding a Loksound decoder to this Athearn Genesis 2.0 Dash 9 here. This is a BNSF unit. Um, Now for this install, I'm going to be replacing the entire factory board. We're already diving in here. As you guys can see, we're going to pull off our couplers here to get into the inside of the shell here. But this is going to be a little bit more of a basic kind of build where I'm just swapping out a board for a different one, adding a speaker, etc. But still something that some of you out there might want to dive into, and this is going to be a little video showing all the steps in the process. So we're starting off here removing our couplers and coupler boxes. As generally, to get a shell off a locomotive, that's where you want to start at, by pulling those off. And on these Genesis units, generally there is two more screws hidden. A lot of times you got to pull the fuel tank off. You're going to watch me here. Loosen up that screw there on the bottom. And then one little trick I like to do is I take a little piece of tape and put that over that screw just to keep it in place, and so I don't get it mixed up with anything. And then here you can see we're getting out our other two screws, which hold the shell onto the frame, motor, and drive assembly. Now for these two screws, I like to put them in a separate bag. That way I know where that those are for that, and then I put that in my bag with my coupler pockets. Now you can see me filing away those wonderful plastic McHenry couplers because we don't know those where we're going. Now here's a little look at the inner workings of one of these shells here. As you can see, these Genesis units use a combination of like a light piping kind of deal for the headlights, as well as actual LEDs mounted inside the shell. So you can see they have like a little contact pad deal. And we're going to leave all that intact. I'm not going to redo any of that. When I did a little test run of this unit, the headlights and everything seemed fine to me, so I didn't see a reason to yank out the LEDs and all that and replace them. So here is the board we're going to be using. This is a ESU, it's a 444-9W decoder board, and it has the built-in power pack. And the reason I went with that board in this unit is these Genesis units, as you can tell, kind of have a bit of a tight packaging inside there. And to give me more room for my speaker, it made more sense to use that 444-9W board with the power pack built in than to try and add a separate power pack and use like a decoder buddy or something like that. So we're going ahead and we're diving in here. And right now, I'm just kind of going through some of the wiring in here and trying to figure out what's what and what goes to where. We're going to go ahead and we're going to start unhooking things from our board here. I'm going to go ahead and pull these little plastic clips off. So you can see those tweezer deals that work really nice for that, the angle type. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to write down where wires are going to. As you see, green wire, there's our F5. And I'm just going to pull these wires off one by one and write down what they were hooked up to on the factory board, just to kind of try and help later on kind of figure out what's what as far as like what's ditch lights and number boards, etc. And then two, it just kind of makes things simpler to have a rough idea, at least for the lighting functions as to what's what. And you can see I found an extra wire there. That would be a wire that would you could use for doing like step lights or something like that. I obviously didn't go that route with this build. I wanted to keep it a little more simple. So we're going to go ahead and we're just going to keep pulling these plastic clips off. There's our motor wires, I believe. It should be the motor wires. And then as you can see there, I put down the red wire as the motor plus, which is the top one, and then the black wire would be the motor minus, to make things simple there. I always like to just take note of that stuff. So we're just going to keep pulling these little plastic tabs off and separating our wires from the board. And just kind of, a little bit of time, just doing one wire at a time. You don't need to go in and just start pulling all the wires out all at once or anything, especially when you're trying to reuse a lot of the factory stuff. Now, if I was going to replace all of the lighting, I would, obviously none of this would matter. But in this situation, I'm trying to figure out, what wires, what's that way I can just reattach it all and not have to deal with the hassle of tracing every last wire later on when I go to put it together. Now those big black wires there, those are our power pickup wires from the trucks. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to pull those off. And then we obviously have all of our headlight wiring back there as well. It's a bit of a rat's nest here, but that's fine. Go ahead and pull our truck wires off again here on the front. And that should be all of our wires loose from our board, with the exception of the headlight, which we just unhooked. So now we kind of look around all this stuff and just figure out what's in here and what wires what. We're going to go ahead and we're going to put our new board in and just kind of see what's going on here. Go ahead and I got to pull this weight out of the back. This is where our speaker will be going. Your Genesis 2.0 stuff that does not have sound will have that weight back there in the back, so you got to remove that. As you can see, I'm painting the wheels here. But back to our speaker mount there. I think Athearn has like a sugar cube drop-in speaker deal you can buy for these. I just went ahead and used ESU speakers when we get to that part there, but you got to pull that weight out regardless. But here you can see paint one side of the wheel here. I'm not taking the trucks off. We're getting too carried away here, and then I just turn the flywheel to get to the other side of the wheel. Just being careful not to get paint up around the center of the wheel where the power pickup's at, just making sure I get mainly around the edge here. And I went with a bit of the this brighter orange here. This is the same orange I used on my track, and the reason I went with that is because I want this locomotive to look kind of fresh and clean, just out of the GE factory in Erie. That's basically what this was going to be. I don't want it too weathered or dirty, so I went with that bright orange. Now I'm going to build my speaker enclosure here right now, and to do that I'm going to make what's going to be like a little box essentially out of these ESU speaker housing deals that come with the sugar cube speakers from ESU. And I do it a little bit differently. I like to have like a 3 wide box. So you have like a speaker in the center, you have just a dead chamber, and then on the opposite side you have another speaker. So it's essentially like 3 speakers wide, but I'm only using 2 of them. And the reason I do that is just to give it a little bit bigger sound chamber, so you get a little bit better and louder sound quality. But in order to do that, you have to take and kind of build your own speaker box out of this stuff. So that's all I'm doing here. It takes a little bit of hassle, a little bit of gluing here to make this work. But as you can see, there's kind of going to be the base for our speaker box here. See, it's one of those doubles with another one of the doubles that's cut in half that I glued on there with some of that plastic welder stuff from I think it's Plastistrut. I can't remember. It's a plastic welder. Now, in order to have this speaker enclosure have the space for the sound travel and all that, as you guys can tell here, I'm taking like the bottom level of the speaker box and I'm cutting the sides out of it so that way it'll all interconnect. And then on top of that will be another piece that'll kind of actually enclose it. So that's kind of how I make the speaker boxes. The main thing I'm looking for is to try and have as much of a sound chamber as I can without it being too big to where I can't get the shell back on, right? That's something you really got to pay attention to when you're doing these speaker installs and all that. And this would have been a great project probably for me to try out the scale sound speakers, and of course I didn't have one. I didn't think of it when I went to do this, so I went with the old tried and true ESU speakers because that's what I pretty much use on just about every project. But eventually I would like to try out the scale sound speakers. A lot of you have said they're pretty great, so have to check that stuff out. But either way, if you're building your own speakers, your own speaker enclosure, you just need to really make sure you don't make it too big, because that'll be a pain in your rear end when you find out the hard way that it is. So here you can see I'm starting to glue it together here, and you kind of see in that center section there how I have it all split up there, and how that center section is essentially just going to be a dead sound chamber, as I'd like to call it there. And then the sides are where the sound's going to be coming in at, and that center's where it could kind of meet and have more space. And I've just had really good luck with building these this way. especially with like GP38s and GP40s. They sound incredible with this bigger sound kind of chamber deal versus using a smaller, just double sound chamber. And here you can see I'm using a little canopy glue to glue the speaker on. And the reason I use the canopy glue is because if you use like a super glue or a CA type glue, when it dries, it'll like leave this residue on everything. And I've had some speakers get messed up that way, so I just use the canopy glue here. It takes a little longer to dry, but I'm fine with that because it doesn't do anything goofy. Now here is our decoder board sitting on there. And as you can see, I highly recommend when you're going to go wire one of these boards up, you have the little diagram there. I actually have it sitting off to the left of the camera just to make this a little bit simpler. But in typical Sierra Steve fashion here, we're just going to break this down into its simplest parts and go from there. So what I'm doing right now is I'm starting off with the motor wires. I'm going to connect those first and get those out of the way. I know some of you might be a little bit intimidated by doing DCC and sound installs, but I'm going to tell you right now, it's really not that complicated if you break it down and you just start off at one thing and just work your way through it wire by wire, essentially. So we're starting off with our motor wires, and then you'll do truck wires, and then your different light functions. But if you just take these and do them one at a time, it's much simpler than just looking at it and trying to connect, you know, each part of the rat's nest at the same time. So what I do here is I get a little solder on the board, as seen there, and I'll like get a little solder on the end of the wire, and then I put the two together. Obviously it's pretty simple. Here you can see we're going to take one of our truck wires and connect it here. I'm going to put a little solder on it. Put a little solder on the spot on the board it's supposed to go to. I'll do that with both sides here. And then what I'm going to do is this truck wire is a little bit longer than I want it to be, so I'm going to cut it down a little bit so that I don't have to worry about it making contact with anywhere I don't want to on the decoder board. If there's like one little gripe I have with doing all this stuff, it's trying to solder to these pads on these boards is it can be a bit frustrating at times. But here you can see we're going to do the opposite side now, doing the same deal as before, just putting some solder on the wire and then trimming it down a touch so that way it's not too long to connect to our board. So now I'm going to kind of dig through some of my wires here and just kind of see what's what back here in the back. Try to find my rear lights, etc. As you can see, sometimes you got to trim this stuff down a little bit. And when you have to trim these wires, the real only decent way I've found to strip the insulation off or to get the insulation off these very fine wires is to take the soldering iron and just kind of touch the end of the wire where the insulation's at that you want gone and just kind of burn it a little bit and then pick it off with the fingernail. Now you just gotta be careful you don't burn through the wire all the way and burn the wire off. But right here we're connecting our rear light as well as our U plus back here for the rear end. And you can see you're gonna solder all that up. And the wiring stuff's pretty simple. The one thing to remember is each of your LEDs is going to have two wires coming off of it. No matter what LED it is, there's going to be two wires. Most of the time, your red wires are all going to go to the U plus. Every LED is going to have a red wire. But then some of your different function, like your different, like in this case, you've got like green, blue, red, all those, or green, blue, black, yellow. You get a bunch of different colors for your different function wires, so those will all go to whatever specific function you assign them to, but the red wire from those LEDs will always go to the U plus. So as you can see, we pulled our little contact pad board off here in the front, and I actually just unsoldered that white wire because it's an extra wire I'm not using. And as you guys can tell, that these wires are just packed in here, so anything I can do to kind of clean that up a little bit. I don't need to leave a wire in there I'm not going to use, so might as well just get that out of there and kind of make things a little bit neater. As I mentioned before, if you wanted to add like step weights or something, that would be a great way to do it, would be off of that extra contact there on the board. Now I'm going to start picking through all this and try to find my truck power wires here. And what I'm doing here is, since they all get jumbled together, to make sure I put the, we'll just say the left and right, I put the left side to the left side of the coder board and the right side to the right side. I'm kind of having to pick through and kind of move the wire up there in the front where it comes right out of the truck, and then watch which one actually moves, just to make sure I end up with the right wire connected to the right thing. You can see, of course, we shorten it. Now we're soldering it to burn the insulation down a little bit. And see, we'll just pick that off there. And then we're going to take and burn a little bit more. We got to pick a little bit more off. You just got to keep doing that until you can actually either see the wire coming through, and then you put a little solder on it. And then we'll connect it to our board. And of course, sometimes these wires like to kind of fight a little bit, so you just got to keep playing with them, get the solder level right on them, and boom, attach them to the board. And now we'll do the opposite side wire here as well. I always like to put a little solder down on the pad on the board before I try to connect anything. It just makes it a lot easier to get that to stick. And I also like to try and kind of pull the wires to the right, proper side of the board as well. I don't like to have things tangled up too much, just because it never fails. If you leave wires all tangled up and goofed up, you'll end up in trouble trying to get them to fit right. You'll end up in trouble trying to fix something later if you have a problem, because all the wires are all tangled up and goofed up. So try to keep that stuff somewhat neat. But now I'm going to go ahead and I need to find my headlight wire here. So you can see I'm pulling on it up there in the front, and now I'm trying to find it in the wad of wires here. And as you can see, there it is right there. So obviously that's way longer than we need it to be, so we'll cut that down. And we'll go ahead and install that on our board there. And do a little solder on there, strip the insulation off, and then put some actual solder on the actual wire itself once we get that insulation all the way down. And let's go ahead and get that attached to its spot on the board there. And now for the fun part, we're going to start trying to work our way through our wad of wires here that's everything else. You can see I finally gave up on having all that stuff nice, neatly folded underneath there, and had to just pull all that out, because we're going to end up shortening up a lot of these wires. They're just way too long. So here's all of our function wires here, all kind of put together. As you can see, that black wire that's all tangled up, that would be our step lights, or excuse me, our walkway lights and all that fun stuff. Now right here, I'm trying to figure out what in the heck wire the ditch lights is, I believe. And kind of had to go through all that stuff and start figuring out what's what there. And if I would have been smart, I would have wrote all that down here so I could tell you guys, but I'm kind of having a bit of a brain fart as to what was what. So here we are. I'm doing the walkway lights here. These are the three different wires all bunched together here, and of course these are way too long, so I'm taking them and I'm going to shorten them up. As you can see, I kind of picked the spot where I wanted to shorten them to, and I solder that. I put the soldering iron on that spot to kind of heat them up all together. That way they'll stay together nice and neat, and I can make a clean cut there without all the wires coming apart. And now, of course, you have to burn the insulation off. all those wires so that way they'll make an electrical connection there. And this can be a bit tricky. One thing about when you're trying to do a group of wires like this is it can really take some heat to get that insulation off of all 3 or 4 wires or however many you have. So you gotta be careful, because when you're holding those wires, that heat will transfer into your fingers and it can get very hot in a hurry. So my rule of thumb generally is when it starts to burn my finger, that generally means I probably burn the insulation off. You just gotta be careful, obviously, guys. You don't want to burn yourself, but any of you that do wiring work like this will know what I'm saying. When you could feel it and it starts to feel a little bit too hot, that means it's probably well cooked there. So I go ahead and put a little solder down on my board here for all my functions. And we're going to go ahead and take all those wires and just cut them the same length, because they're all going to be going to about the same place. So we'll go ahead and start connecting all these into place. So we're just going to put these wires in one by one into each of the first few functions here. Obviously, this board has way more function outputs than I need. So if you wanted to really get carried away with adding different lights here, you could. But as I mentioned at the beginning of this, I'm trying to keep this a little bit more simple. And I didn't really feel the need to get too carried away with adding 100 zillion lights to this thing. I kind of like to keep some projects a little bit more on the easy side. And I wanted this to be something where you guys that watch it, it's not going to be super over the top technical. There's 100 wires in the dang thing. I wanted to keep this more of if you bought one of these and wanted to swap it out to ESU, how hard would it really be? And it's really not. This is pretty basic. You're just taking wires off of one board, putting them onto another. You're adding a speaker. So overall, it's really not that hard of a project. This is probably like an hour and a half, 2 hour deal to do all the wiring and speaker building, etc. Now, before I reconnect all my wires back there in the back down and have them taped down nice and neat, I have to put my speaker in, as you can see. We're going to go ahead and install that now. I used a piece of electrical tape on the bottom, just rolled up to keep the speaker in place, to keep it from moving around. And now I have to make my wires going to the speakers. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take 2 wires and I'm going to connect them together on one end, and those will get connected to one of the 2 speaker outputs on the board. So I wire everything in what's called parallel for speakers, and that's where you have 2 output. You have an output, 2 different solder points on the board, and you're going to the speakers. So what you do is each of the outputs has to go to the speakers, essentially. Like one's an in and one's an out, essentially. So you end up having each of those output marks on the board ends up having 2 wires come off of it. So you end up with 4 wires total. I know it probably isn't going to make any sense right now because I'm probably talking in circles trying to explain this, but if we looked at it as there's like a plus and a minus on each speaker, well, you have a plus and a minus on the board. So each plus and minus has to go to 2 places because you have 2 speakers. So I wish I need to find like a diagram I could put in the video right now for when I'm doing these that'll kind of show it a little bit better, because trying to look at the wires in the picture is kind of hard to tell. But if any of you out there are curious, look up parallel speaker wiring on Google, and it'll probably show you a picture that'll make a lot more sense than the gibberish I just talked about there. But that's the way I wire them, just because I tend to have better sound quality that way. I have done them in series before, but didn't quite sound as good, so I've just been kind of doing it this way for quite a while. And these little metal tabs that you solder to on the speakers are quite the pain in the rear end. So you really got to watch these when you're soldering them. The wires will like to come off. Now, we're going to go ahead and we're going to try and fold up some of our wiring neatly back underneath that piece of tape there. Just trying to neaten this up a little bit. It's very difficult back here in the back with wires going all over the place to neaten that stuff up. So now as for the fun part here, we get to put the motor and drive assembly back into the body shell deal. So just got to be very careful and watch your wires. You can see there I'm kind of poking them back in and make sure that they don't hook on anything inside the shell when you're trying to put them back through there. It could definitely be a bit of a challenge because you're always going to have like a wire that wants to go somewhere it shouldn't. And the last thing you want to do is after you spend all this time soldering stuff is rip a wire right out because you were trying to shove the thing back through. So just gotta go ahead and work at that a little bit and then get the motor and drive back in there. Now we can go ahead and start our final assembly and work on this unit here. We just got to put our screws back in the bottom here for the body. You have the one there inside like the rear truck hole there. No, we'll call that the rear truck hole, I suppose. And you have your one up here in the front as well. Of course I drop it because, you know, that's the way she goes. I guess I'm going to be juggling that one around there for eternity here. I'm going to juggle this screw around. And we'll go ahead and get that guy in there. And now we'll go ahead and we'll put our fuel tank back on there. And as you can see, that piece of tape, you put your tank down, it pushes the screw up, pushes the tape off. So it's another great reason why you use the tape deal there, the tape technique, if you will. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to put our couplers on now. I'm using KD 158s, the whisker style 58 is what I go with when I swap out couplers on these units. These particular ones, I believe, already have the trip pins cut off of them, or maybe they don't. I don't know. I don't use the trip pins on my couplers, so of course I had to fumble the screw back there in the back as well upon the install here of the couplers. One little thing not to overlook when you put your couplers back in is you screw the coupler box down. You always want to make sure you try and move your coupler before you like turn it over and say it's good, because sometimes you could over tighten those coupler screws and your couplers won't move freely from side to side. So always kind of watch that when you're putting those couplers back in. And you can see our front coupler definitely has the trip pin cut off of it because it's right up against the plow. I don't use like long shank couplers or anything fancy schmancy. I just use the standard KD 158s for everything. And sometimes they, could be a little bit long, or they could be a little close to the plows and stuff. So I always just cut those trip pins right off. Now, when you're putting these coupler boxes in, another thing to note as well, before I forget to mention this, is watch out for the coupler cut bars on these locomotives, or really any locomotive you go to put them in on, because the coupler boxes sometimes will catch and flatten out your cut bar, and it'll look kind of not so great. So as I mentioned at the beginning of this, I wanted to kind of keep this locomotive looking pretty, fresh out of the factory, or relatively fresh. So all I did for weathering on this was I just painted the grills black, just using some black acrylic airbrush paint. This is like a flat black. I believe it's the Badger Model Flex flat black, if I'm not mistaken, but it's an airbrush paint. And as you can see, I'm applying it with a brush here. And the reason I use this stuff for grills and stuff specifically, is it's thin enough that it'll go down into all the little crevices and stuff, and really flows nice into those spots. And then too, it's also very easy to clean up when you goof up and get paint outside the lines, because some of us have trouble painting inside the lines. You can see I got my Q-tip here for wiping up where I get paint outside all over the place, because I am not perfect, and I don't try to pretend to be either. So here you can see we're gonna paint this grill in black too. This is just based off a prototype photo loosely I saw. I believe it was like the 97, 98-ish was the photo I saw, where it looked like the locomotive had been in service for a couple months, but really the only dirt on it was in the grills. So I kind of liked that. I thought it was a pretty sharp look, so that's why I decided to go with my weathering on this. These the Santa Fe and the BNSF war bonnets are probably one of the, at least in my opinion, one of the most iconic paint schemes in railroading. And especially as somebody that I was interested in the hobby in the late 90s and early 2000s, when the blue boxes were still a big thing. And I remember going to train shows and seeing the blue box Athearns, like on the front of the box. It had that, I think it was a Dash 9, I'm not mistaken, I'd have to go look. But that was like the newer style blue box, had the Santa Fe or BNSF war bonnet unit on the front of it, and that was just really, really cool. So kind of something I remember, and that was part of the reason I have this unit, as well as I actually have a Santa Fe Dash 9 as well. But just kind of something cool I wanted to put together, just another piece of kind of foreign run-through power for me to have here on the layout. And I just kind of thought it would be a good, simple, more basic how-to video than my usual over-the-top long-winded, we're painting, we're doing all this, that, and the other. So I figured maybe this would be something a little bit more for some of you guys that, maybe don't have as much of the skills and the gumption yet, but would like to grow and learn more. So as always, guys, I want to thank all of you for watching, subscribing, commenting, liking. I really appreciate all that stuff more than you guys will ever know. And as always, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. It takes me forever to reply back to comments, but I will get back to you. And until next time, guys, I'm Conrail Steve, and I'll see you in the next video.